Okay, so I see that it is 12 o'clock on the dot, and to be respectful of our panelists' time and our students' time, I will start the program. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to mention that today's program will be recorded, so that in case we have students who couldn't make the program, we can send them the recording so they can gain the information. And I also want to thank the Women's Leadership Initiative at Albany Law School for making this program possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's program, Careers in State and Local Legislatures. I've learned a lot in preparation for this program, and I can't wait to hear everything they have to contribute. So I'm going to start with Alejandra Paulino. Alejandra graduated from Albany Law School in 2002 and is secretary to the New York State Senate Democratic Conference. Welcome, Alejandra. And do you want to provide us with a little bit about your background?
So I will say I am now secretary to the Senate, but I was secretary to the Democratic Conference. And I started right after Albany Law School at the Senate through a New York State Senate fellowship. So I was here for a year, and then soon thereafter got hired by a member from Queens, originally from Brooklyn. So it was an interesting time many, many moons ago. In the minority. And then many members were telling me that I had to practice law so that I can get comfortable with myself and learn to practice my skills. So I left. So I worked for Jim Long, a solo practitioner. I got into election law work. I got into the PD's office, thanks to now Judge Devine. So I started doing criminal defense work. And that led me to federal criminal defense work. And when the Democrats took the majority 10 years ago, I went back in to the New York State Senate, and I was corrections counsel at first. And then I became team counsel. So I had sort of custody of all the fun public safety committees like Homeland Security, Veteran Affairs, Code, Judiciary, still corrections. So that was quite an education, learning about budget as well. And then I still practiced, right? So I still maintained my own practice. I still did a lot of work for other attorneys, including Jim Long, which was a great is still an education. And I've been with really the Senate since 2009, since that time. And now I am more of an administrator. However, because as secretary, I am the record keeper. I am the home of all of the subpoenas and service of process and personnel matters and all kinds of other things. We get to oversee some of the litigation as well. So I have a great partner, Will Little, who is counsel to my office, who's also an alum. So he is what I call the captain of the ship in terms of the litigation that goes in and out of this place for all the members, right? So at this point, that transition to doing and working with all the members and all the staff has been a great progression for me. And as a lawyer, which at first I wasn't sure how much lawyering I would do here, but it continues.
Yes, once a lawyer, always a lawyer. Thank you very much, Alejandra. Kristen Frank. Kristen is Albany Law class of 2011 and is chief counsel to the New York State Republican Conference. Kristen, can you give us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's great to be back virtually, I guess. So I kind of did the opposite route as Alejandra, as far as I did private first. In law school, I had some great internships. I worked at a personal injury firm, Martin, Harding and Mazzotti. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials, which are actually very effective, as questionable as they are. So I did that. I worked at another private firm that dealt a lot with divorces, And then after law school, I went to information technology services. So I had some experience there. And then I came over to the legislature. I came over to the assembly, working for central staff. So I had more of the education issues, higher education, and that was a great experience, working for all of the Republican assembly members. I think at the time there were about 40. So then I was offered a job to work for a female senator who was starting. She is from the Finger Lakes region. So I came over to the Senate and I worked with her for 3 years. And then I entered this role that I'm in now, which basically oversees central staff, council, and finance offices for the Republican conference in the Senate. I started that in July of this year. So it feels like a lifetime, but it hasn't even been a year yet. And I am lucky enough, I call Alejandra and Will Little, who is also great, as she said, a lot. And I have not looked back. Government is absolutely great. It's a great experience, and I know we'll get more into it, so I won't jump ahead.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And finally, Rebecca Nellis Kennedy. Rebecca is Albany Law Class of 2007 and serves as the Majority Counsel with the Albany County Legislature. Rebecca, welcome. And can you give us a little bit about your background? Uh-oh, you are muted. Or a little bit of connectivity problem, I think. We can't hear you. I think she's now we can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So when I was in law school, I thought I was going to be a DA. So I worked at the DA's office and then related to domestic violence specifically. And I clerked for the DV court and did all of that. And then Joanne Casey actually is the one who recommended that I look into clerkships. So I clerked for the 3rd department after graduation. From there, I decided I could not afford to, unfortunately, work for the DA's office with student loans and everything. So I went into private practice at D'Agostino Crackler in Manans, where I worked primarily at medical malpractice, defense, and municipal defense, which actually led me into my next position because while at D'Agostino Crackler, I represented the town of Colony in municipal defense. And I then had a friend, I had lunch with her one day and she asked if I was interested in coming to the town of Colony. So I went to the town of Colony for the next 10.5 years, where I was a senior town attorney, handling all of the torts and litigation caseload for the town, all sorts of negotiation and drafting of contracts of various sorts and all of that. And then in the last year, I had a friend call me up and ask if I was interested in applying for this position. I'm the first female majority counsel ever in the 100-some years of the county legislature and board of supervisors before that and everything. So here I counsel the legislative members of the Democratic majority. There are 30 Democratic members out of a 39 person body. We do all sorts of everything here. I set the agenda, we ensure that the agenda is up to date and all of that. And then everything down to seeker, which I had done previously with the town as well. And just counseling all of the members in whatever they may have come up. So if someone calls and says, hey, I want to do a local law for such and such, we do all the background, all the research, all the drafting to ensure that that comes to fruition. And then we work with the negotiation as it moves forward and help the members out in whatever way we can.
Great, that's really helpful. And I have a burning question that I have to ask you because I couldn't figure this out in my research. And I will say I shared with the group earlier that I am woefully uneducated when it comes to New York State and local legislatures. So I am dying to know, does the Albany County Legislature have 2 houses? Is it a bicameral system or like New York State or no?
No, one legislative body, 39 members, currently 9 Republican, currently 8 Republicans, we just had a resignation, and 30 Democrats.
Great. Thank you very much. I had to know the answer to that. All right. So that brings us into, I would love to provide our students on the call, and please, students, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Go ahead, raise your hand. Let's make this interactive so you get the absolute most out of it. Okay. Feel free to just unmute and ask questions. But I want to start with sort of an overview of, let's start with the state legislature. And I'm going to turn to you, Alejandra, because you have so much experience. Can you give us an idea of the structure of the legislature generally and leadership?
So generally, we do have 2 houses. Each house has a majority and minority leader. The way they're labeled are different. So the assembly has, you would call a speaker of the house, whereas in the Senate, Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins is temporary president and majority leader. 2 separate titles. One role at one point 10 years ago, it was split into 3. It's kind of funny, but it wasn't at that time. Some of you may know or not know. And then there are leadership positions among each conference, from deputy leader, which usually means there are also floor leaders on the floor leading the members in debate and in whatever matters that are going to be processed. And then finance chairs. So when it comes to leadership positions between conference chairs and finance, and then deputy majority leader, and that's pretty much the same in both. And at that point, let me see. I mean, each conference picks their own leader, right? And by default, that leader picks their own leadership team. And each leader then decides to pick their own senior staff. I know that as secretary of the minority at that time, depending on how, different leaders lead different, right? So, so I would say each house gets to control their house rules. That's why you probably will never, and if you look, ever see that a judge ever interferes with matters of a house, no matter how, because we're being recorded, messed up, certain things occur within each house. So that I will say, when it comes to the process of how a bill becomes a law, you definitely need partnerships, right? Because unless you get the Senate and the Assembly agreeing on something, it's got to be the same bill, or you amend it to be, but the governor has to ultimately sign, right? So I would say when you hear about chapter amendments, usually that just means that if an agreement in theory occurred, and then later it'll be fixed. But there is a lot, but I think maybe that could help in terms of the framework, I guess.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you. And so, Kristen, do you have anything to add to what Alejandra has provided us? And specifically, I'm curious, first of all, I just have to say, I love the fact that when you came on, you said, I'm so happy that I get to call upon Alejandra and Will Little, right? Even though in theory, different sides of the aisle, but it's such a wonderful example of what Alejandra just mentioned, right? That collaborative leadership. And so can you tell me a little bit about committees and committee work and structure?
Sure, absolutely. So each house they're mostly the same committees in each house, a little bit different with the names, but they range all issue areas. I know Alejandra mentioned her past with codes, judiciary, the criminal, packages. As I mentioned, there's education, higher education. So the higher ed, and these committees encompass so many different things you wouldn't even think of. Higher ed, for example, touches on a lot of the licensed professions. So even like tattoo artists fall in there, which you wouldn't maybe necessarily automatically have your mind go to. What else do we have? Health is obviously, with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, a huge committee issue area. Then we have mental health, developmental disabilities, aging for our elderly population. And pretty much when senators and assembly members introduce bills, depending on what laws we're amending, what issue area, those bills get assigned to committees. And then each week committees meet and they'll put through legislation. Certain members are assigned to committees. They will review, the committees will meet, and they'll either vote to move these bills through committee to the floors, the Assembly and Senate chambers to be voted on, or they will hold the bills if they don't get enough votes. Something if any of you are interested, all of these things are online, so you can watch these committee meetings, you can watch session. If there was a bill you were interested in, you want to track, everything can be watched online. It's also interesting to see the differences between how the Assembly and the Senate operate. I think for every 10 bills we pass in the Senate, they pass one just because of the different procedures, the slow roll calls. Obviously there's 150 members in the Assembly they have to work with. We are much smaller. So it's very interesting to see the differences.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So Rebecca, you talked a little bit about how the structure is different at the county level. I mean, beginning with the fact that there are not two houses. What are other observations you have that distinguish working at the county level from working at the state level?
Well, Albany County has a legislature as opposed to a board of supervisors, which is different from county to county throughout the state. We also have the breakdown in power by we have a chairman, Andrew Joyce, a majority leader, Dennis Feeney, and a minority leader, who's Frank Moriello, who they're the leadership, and they do quite a bit of discussion back and forth on various topics on pretty much a daily basis. In terms of our committee structure, we also have 11 standing committees ranging from public works and health to public safety, personnel, and of course, audit and finance being one of our biggest committees. Each member is on probably 2 to 3 committees. The committees are very important in terms of the structure and moving things forward. Each item, for the most part, gets put in the committee structure and is reviewed by a committee as a whole. If the committee deems it appropriate and wants to move it forward, they can move it forward with a positive recommendation. Otherwise, they can move it forward with no recommendation or a negative recommendation to the actual legislative meeting the following month. So it's obviously very important for things to get through that committee process and to be properly vetted by the committees and the sponsors, whoever they may be. That's pretty much how our structure works. It's different from a lot of counties who do have the board of supervisors, and I've noticed I spent a lot of time on like Suffolk County's website because they seem to have a local law for everything, and their board of supervisors meetings are 1 day a month, all day during the day, and then their committee meetings are again just wildly voluminous meetings. So it's very interesting to see from county to county how each works out, but that's how we primarily work in Albany County.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. So a fun fact, what I learned yesterday is that, and this data is somewhat dated, but as of 2009, the New York State Legislature had 2,700 employees, more than almost any other state. And that got me thinking. I thought to myself, wow, what are some of the differences between elected positions, which seem very few compared to that number, and these other types of positions? Alejandra, you want to start with trying to tackle that one?
Right. That's interesting because I was here in 2009 and there was also a recession and a whole lot of stuff going on. So I know what that looked like. I will say for the record right now, the New York State Senate has about almost 1,100 folks, I will say, and that's including members, staff and member offices, the joint entities, right? So the Senate, I administer the funds for the library, the messengers, the nurses, the only 2 of them, by statute. They have to be in the building. When members are in the building for session, we must have a nurse by mandate on staff. I mean, when it comes to work in government, you have people that have, really long careers in public service, working in information technology and STS. I mean, you talk about the Zoom life, the staff here within a week of all this happening last year during this pandemic, and in a weekend, right, set up the ability for all of us to do Zoom conferences. So we have programmers, developers, right? And then we have our own mail house in the Senate. So we have these huge machines, all the mail you all get, we print ourselves, So there's a lot of people that hopefully will be here for a long time, that really are, as I call, our essential doers, right? I feel like here we have doers and thinkers. I was a thinker, now I'm a doer. I'm actually still both. But the point is that I'm making is that both have value, right? And both are necessary for the continuity of government. And it wasn't even, and it was just so much more clear last year in March, that we need the doers to produce this show for the thinkers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do anything at all. There are some appointed positions that conferences appoint, like they appoint their Secretary of Finance. They can appoint their secretary to the minority. I am elected on the floor by the members. So that means that I can only be fired for cause, as opposed to everybody else who can be fired, who are employees at will. It is a protection, since I hold the keys and the money to the house, that for any reason, like political reasons, I cannot be fired if something happens, for like a lot of things. So those are sort of the built-in protections that were put in place probably when they thought about this position of Secretary of the House. Our Sergeant at Arms, he's also someone that on the floor gets a vote, and our stenographer for some reason, right? But historically it is. So she gets to, there's a resolution for her for 2 years to be, but she's also, right, the record keeper of all the things we do on the floor. So that's what I would say, that there are not many elected positions, and in the assembly, it is a little different. And they do have a lot of staff there as well. So I can see that 2,700 number, and I can see where it lies, right? Especially if you put us both together.
Yeah, that was so helpful though, because the way you described it made me sort of envision, a small business, right?
It is.
It's everything, it's every person that it takes to run a small business, or actually kind of a bigger business. Thank you for that. So Kristen, I'm going to turn to you with my next question, and this is from a student. So, and I think it follows nicely in terms of working for the legislature. Does a political affiliation matter in order to get the job?
No, and that's something that, when we interview, one of the questions I like to ask is, are you able to work without letting your political views affect your job? Because if you're working for a member or the conference as a whole and you disagree, it's not a personal thing. This is, you are doing what your member requests or the leaders. So no, that, and as long as you're able to keep that separate, if you're extremely passionate and you worry that might kind of deter you from working for a certain party, that's something you need to assess yourselves. But, we try to keep it very separate. I do not let my viewpoints really get in the way of what a member is asking me.
Can I just add to that, Kristen, because I know I spoke to you, Mary, about this earlier, and we, with the Senate Fellowship Program, it's a postgraduate program, so we do like to take in a lot of lawyers from Albany Law School. But I have this, and for all of you who are applying, I think this is good. This is great for all of you to know now, that a lot of people have this ideal of what they want to do when they get here. And I've seen this over almost 20 years, okay, of this ideal coming in. And at the end of the day, the only person who's elected to do and represent their constituents is the member, right? So you may, assist the member, but when your member is asking for talking points, when they're asking for arguments on a certain bill that they're advocating for, some will enjoy some banter and argument, and some just want you to do that job, right? So I think a successful person is that which can do both, right? And as lawyers, that's what eventually, right, you're trying to get good at, right? Picking through and dissecting arguments. You should be able to do both 3, 5 sides. If you're gonna work for central staff and you have a large conference, you need to be able to argue any point across that spectrum if you really want to be successful here, right? I mean, if you get lucky enough to work for one member and you get to know that member, then get really good at doing those things for that member. And maybe you'll be lucky enough that your 2 points of interest intersect, right? So I just want to put out there that little piece, because Kristen is absolutely right. I think here, I think a lot of members just really want people who do good work, right? A good conversation leads to good bills, right? But when it comes to somebody saying that they won't, or you can see it. You all know when you don't put your heart in to work, you can see it, right? So the other person will see it too. And that's usually how we get exit interviews here. So just saying.
That is great. Great advice. Great advice. So Rebecca, anything to add to any of that from the perspective of the county legislature?
No, I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, you have to be prepared to come in and just do the work, regardless of which party you work for. In terms, I mean, obviously Albany County is a little more leaning in one way, but it is my job to go and do the work, ensure that the bills that are provided to me or the ideas that have been brought up are kind of vetted. I shoot down ideas that aren't appropriate or could be problematic in some way, that sort of thing. So it really has nothing to do with what party I am. It's more just everyone wants to come to a good law.
Great. So I'm just a little bit curious about this. How often might, and I'll direct this to Kristen, how often might you see someone move from one side to the other? And I shouldn't say it like that, to move in between conferences. Let me say it like that.
Are you talking about staff?
Yes.
And maybe Alejandra, I have not seen it. I think.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
I
Not funny.
have not really seen it in my experience. I think, with everything we've just said, you're going to work, do your work, but you also know your own ideals. And I mean, mine have changed over the years for sure as I've learned more things, but I think you kind of know where you want to be. And unless there's a drastic shift, but otherwise I haven't really seen it. People kind of go in knowing how they feel.
But I will say, there are folks that do go, and it's usually majority, right? So Kristen, I wouldn't necessarily say someone leaves a conference. I would say professionally,
yes,
right? They've gotten to a point where they are so good at what they're doing and they want to do something else. And there's just a ceiling, right? That you reach in terms of being able to, you want to sit at the table and negotiate with the governor's office, agencies, and the assembly. It's going to have to be in the majority and whoever that majority is. So certainly 10 years ago when we took the majority, there are still a lot of great staffers back then who were Republican staffers who we continued to hire because they were great at what they did, right? You know, I mean, the governor's office is a perfect example. You know, they're an equal opportunity employer, right? Because they're employing the best of who has had the experience. So it is very rare because each conference becomes your family. And I'm gonna say it like that, right? I mean, it's still your, you know, you get to know the members, it's comfortable, it's safe. So I think that is sort of how things go. So you're more likely to sort of stay within the family, let's say, right? Maybe join a lobbyist group that has staff that used to work for the same conference, right? So there are other things, but certainly there are those people that professionally, like, they're driven, they know what they want to do, you know what I mean? They've you know, they want to draft, like they don't want to be whispering anymore into someone's ear about how something should be done. They want to be at the table to tell them what they've done. And over the years, even though I've always worked for the Democratic Conference, I will say that I have been asked to go over. So, and certainly no one's gonna miss me, you know what I mean? So it does happen, you know, I think, so if you do good work, wherever you go, it's going to get noticed. So that's what I will say.
Very helpful. Although I disagree with the nobody's going to miss me portion of it, but thank you. All right. So Rebecca, I'm curious about the difference, if you can talk a little bit about this, the difference between working for a member and working for the conference.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've never worked directly for any particular member, of course, because I represent the Democratic Caucus. But I do answer to the majority leader. Working for the entire caucus is very interesting because even though it's, I mean, 30 members of a 39-person body, there are very different viewpoints throughout the Democratic Caucus. So it's just, we do all of the work that in the background, any member may bring us. Some members may prefer to work with our office. Some members might prefer to work with the chair's office. Some members prefer to do it all on their own and bring you a largely finished product, or what they think is a largely finished product. So that's been my experience, just handling everything that comes up, from setting the agendas to ensuring that whatever is brought up to my attention is handled, vetted, and made into something that can be a good legal law.
Kristen, anything to add to that difference between working directly with members and for a conference?
I agree a lot with what Rebecca said. I think when you work, there are a lot of personalities when you work for a conference, obviously, and a lot of different viewpoints. It's interesting because you can, you know, when I worked for central staff in the assembly, I was more focused on the issue areas.
Thank you.
But when you work for one member, you kind of have to know a little bit about everything because you're working, you know, helping the constituents of that district. So it's just, it is very different, but I think, you know, depending on what you like and the way you learn, I think it depends if you want to work for a member or the conference as a whole. They're both extremely enlightening, that's for sure.
Can I just say, because I've worked for 2 members of the minority as well. So when you are in a place perhaps with a lot less staff, you end up being the lawyer, the driver, the body person, the communications person, the event planner for a senior event. And those are the things that kind of make the job fun, but also out of law school, because that was my experience. You know, you all gonna come out of law school and be like, I'm a lawyer, I'm a superstar. And it's like, wait a minute, you know, you're not climbing mountains here. But I will say that, because that you do learn some humility. Like I know I did, right? Because I'm thinking I'm a lawyer now. And but they don't care. They need a hand, right? They just need someone to make some calls. They need someone to make sure that the buses are ready. You know what I mean? So there is nothing really above you, or it shouldn't be actually. And all the work is valued, right? And what could be, somebody walking in with a constituent issue, you definitely should never give legal advice out of your office. Refer them somewhere else. But at least you know who to refer them to. So I just think, and that for me was the really drastic difference between, when I went from member staff to central staff, I answered or gave the meat for the letters for constituent problems. You know what I mean? But I no longer was the person really going to district for those events, helping out. And I think, even with Senator Helming, I'm sure, you're there, you're going to be, you're part of that team, which is a different part of a team than, like, for example, when I worked for the public defender's office, right? No one's asking anyone in the PD's office to go do certain things. You're just handling client cases, right? Even though we can talk about that later. So that's what I will say, the difference between, member office and central staff. And minority majority be different, because majority, you probably have more people. So you probably wouldn't need the lawyer to drive or be everything else. But
That's really helpful. That is really helpful in setting the stage. So Alejandra, I'm going to stay with you for 1 minute for this next question. What are some ways, I know you mentioned the Senate Fellowship, and we have students apply for that every year as a great way directly into the legislature. Are there other ways for students to come in right from law school?
Many students intern, and everybody loves free work, right? So a lot of the members, and we help them facilitate these relationships. So I would say it usually ends up being, you'll call somebody, you'll call your member, right, from your area or not, or someone that's interested in what you're interested in, and you'll start doing that work. And if it happens plenty of times, so you do good work, they'll say, let's put you on, right? So I know a lot of my friends, either came in as interns, or, just submitting a resume, right? But when you're gonna try to work for a member, you submit it directly to the member's office. If you want, go to an event, perhaps introduce yourself to the staff, make it more personable. They meet and talk to hundreds of people all the time. So that I would say a lot of people come in either through campaigns or events or groups as well. Again, you're working with, meaning the member's office is already working with, right? Maybe where you're volunteering or doing an internship for. So
that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. And Kristen, I have a student question here about coursework. Are there certain courses that students can take to prepare themselves for this type of career?
I think I would say anything kind of government related, all of your skill classes too, because a lot of those, like, I'm standing up in conference and briefing the members every day. So, public speaking, the lawyering 101, while maybe, it's not going to teach you how to write a piece of legislation line by line, you're still familiarizing yourself with how to read the law. So a lot of those skill classes, any type of mediation, negotiation, it all helps, I think, communicating with the members and your colleagues.
Great. Anything else to add from either of our other panelists?
work in service industry, whatever you can. I just think, I bartended when I was in law school too. So it just, the more people you meet, right, the more people you interact with, you have the rest of your life for CLEs. Okay, so I will just say that to that person, as I learned after, you got to keep studying the rest of your life. But if you do the skill-based classes, and practice them, and I think that is really helpful to really build upon. If you're really good at an area of law, certainly, when you're looking for committee work, you stand out, but there is nothing that you can't all learn. And I just think you all need to believe that, even now when it doesn't seem possible in a way, because you're still in school. But all of you can learn anything at any time. And that's at least the one thing you get from law school. You can pick up whatever you want. You didn't take a class last year? Guess what? There'll be a CLE on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is so much time for so many things. So I just think, be good to yourself. That's what I say.
Love that. All right, so I'm going to start our sort of quick lightning round, last few questions, and then I'm going to open up for any questions that students may have and that they haven't been asked yet. Rebecca, the most rewarding thing about your career?
I mean, being able to serve the public certainly is its own reward, and you just meet so many different people from all different viewpoints and all different paths, and I find that very interesting. Also, not knowing what I'm going to do every day when I come into work, because literally anything I have planned is not going to happen, and everything will go crazy before the end of the day. So I find that very interesting. So that's my favorite part of the job.
Kristen, what's a piece of, go ahead.
Same question, or am I
Yeah.
moving? Oh, what piece of advice?
I'll do that next.
Okay. I have to echo exactly what Rebecca said. Two things. It's never a dull moment. I love that. You have you're passing different legislation every day. It's all different. You never are bored. And then helping people. And I just want to give one example. When the pandemic started, I was working for Senator Helming from the Finger Lakes, and we were getting constituent calls every day, all day long. People were unable to get their unemployment benefits, and all they wanted was just to be able to figure out how to access the system. It's like they just wanted to be heard and know that someone was helping them. And people would call after and just be so grateful that in the middle of a crisis, there was someone they could turn to, and that was extremely rewarding.
Terrific. Thank you for the example. Alejandra, most rewarding?
A little bit of both. I will say that I am slightly biased with my criminal defense work that sometimes I get to comment on here, because it's really the random, unexpected thank yous, right? It's the gratitude, really, which you don't get often. Lawyers aren't, have the people, you don't love us, let's be, but the rare times where you have someone that genuinely is grateful for something that you did, and sometimes I have to tell you, it is just listening. It is just listening. So those are those moments that I find the most rewarding, where, okay, I feel like at the end of the day, what did I do today? What in the storm? And then you're walking out and someone just says, like, thank you for taking a couple of minutes and talking me through this. And so you just start realizing that you don't even know what impact you're having on other people at the time. But that I find rewarding.
And I'll stay with you for my second question in the lightning round. What advice would you give to your former self, your law student self?
You know what? Do some self-care. Lawyering is toxic. It is, y'all. It is. Okay. If I knew what I know now, I would not have changed what I did. I mean, I hustle. I enjoy it tremendously. I did everything. I mean, I bartended. I was on moot court. I was on balsa, on LALSA. I worked at the airport authority. I did an internship. I did everything, you know? But then that life continued for like the rest of I'm 43 years old. And it wasn't over the last, and then you become, a co-parent, a wife, a mother, right? And then it just gets to a point where you are, to lawyer that's your job, right? You're helping, you're healing, you're solving, you're taking in all that junk, right? You really are. So you need to remove the junk, however you remove it, right? So my advice to all of you moving forward is do not underestimate the power of negative energy, toxic environments, toxic situations where your body is telling you, you have to go through that, right? Especially if like you're a lawyer and you're doing, whether it's criminal defense work or any work, right? You are taking in certain things. Just take the time to remove it. Just take the time to meditate, find that time to take care of yourself. And I think I would have wanted someone to tell me in school that part of life as a lawyer for the betterment of my family, my marriage, and your friends, little people, is to really take some time for yourself. Because if you're tired, stressed out, exhausted, hungry, you're not good for anybody. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say.
I think that's some very worthy advice. I would have liked to have given myself that same advice. Rebecca, what advice would you have for your former law school self?
Well, I certainly agree with everything Alejandra said. But in addition, try not to pigeonhole yourself too early. I mean, you may think you know what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're in law school, but plans change. Things happen. And I mean, sometimes you have control over a situation, sometimes you don't, but just be open to new things, and you never know where you're going to end up.
Great. Kristen?
Okay, so I had the same question.
Yeah, what advice would you give to your law school self?
Okay, so I had a lot and then I had to narrow it down. And I feel like you guys are going to think I'm lying because it's so close to what Alejandra said that I have to show you. It says, don't be so hard on yourself. And I think it goes along. And I think anyone who's trying to further their education, they're wired a certain way, they want to, I think just don't be so hard on yourselves. Everything, like Alejandra said, you can learn things. Just don't enjoy it and relax. It's all going to work out, even if it's not the way you planned. But life is just so hard in general with every aspect of life. Being a lawyer should be rewarding, and just relax is what I would tell myself. And I tell myself that a lot now still.
Thank you. Very well said. So with that, I'm just going to invite, do any of our students have questions? Any of the panelists? Okay, I'm going to ask one more question that I have to know the answer to. Couldn't find it. Why is it sometimes conference and sometimes caucus?
We don't have caucuses anymore. I think this is a term of art, right? Right, Kristen? I mean, we have, when we were living a life when we had the Independent Democratic Conference, then we had 3 conferences, right? So now we're just majority and minority, which is 2 conferences. there are other caucuses, but in the Senate, I know we don't necessarily officially recognize them like the Assembly. So there's the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian caucus, right? They're but those are kind of the women's caucus, right? And those are bicameral. But the Senate, we don't, we just haven't recognized formal caucuses, but we are members of caucuses with both houses.
Very helpful. Thank you. I knew I was bringing my questions to the right place. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to say thank you for like being so genuine and authentic throughout this panel. It's very easy to be like intimidated in these types of situations where, especially like a small group, but it leaves me feeling reassured that there's room for like being your genuine, authentic self in government, and it's just awesome. So I just wanted to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any final questions? Okay, with that, I want to say thank you so much. I echo everything that Rebecca just eloquently said. Thank you so much for being here, for bringing your authentic selves, for helping our students to feel hopeful and aspirational in all they do in the future, and for continuing to be great role models. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to the next time we can be together.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.